Hello and welcome to the first of two lectures on the Great War, or World War One, and this is the U.S. Army, the one's you. All right, so we're going to look at how the United States got involved into this war, their contributions to the war, and then the clashes, the political clashes over the Treaty of Versailles. All right, so World War One and its aftermath is going to intensify ongoing debates about the nation's role in the world and how best to achieve national security and pursue Americans' interests. And two camps, the isolationists and the internationalists. And the isolationists wanted to go back to that old tradition of staying out of European affairs, and the internationalists saying the United States should have a broader role in world affairs. So just a quick recap of what World War One was. It was a violent outburst of nationalism that, because of a series of alliances, drew in all of the major powers in Europe and their colonies around the world. And two major fronts are in the war. The first is the Western Front right here, between Britain and France on one side and mostly Germany on the other side. And this had bogged down into a stalemate where there's no clear winner. The defenses were too strong of barbed wire and machine gun, but they did try a lot of offense to break through using deadly weapons like artillery shells and even chemical weapons like mustard gas, but to no avail, and just throwing the bodies up, millions and millions up against those machine guns for maybe a few miles of mud. On the Eastern Front, Russia was out, and Germany had helped to get the Vladimir Lenin into Russia to lead a revolution, and the communists have come to power there. And keep that in mind. That's going to sort of play a role in American and other Western thinking throughout the next period of time. And the war is from 1914 to 1918, but America doesn't join until 1917. But that doesn't mean they're not watching. There's a lot of support for the Allies, that's Britain and France and Russia, and also a lot of support for the Central Powers and a lot of people who are just against the war altogether. So support for Britain and France, well, much of the economic ties are to them, cultural ties with Britain, their foreign policy sort of in line with them. And Germany had, at the beginning of the war, had attacked France through neutral Belgium, and that was really played up of the evil Germans. And the Germans had been attacking American shipping, arguing that it's helping out Britain, which it was. And in 1915, in the earlier stages of the war, the most famous passenger ship of the time, the Lusitania, was torpedoed by a German U-boat. And this did not bring the Americans into war, but it gave a lot of push to, siding with the Allies. And the Germans, out of fear of pulling the Americans into the war on the Allied side, actually stopped all of their attacks on American shipping. The support for the Central Powers, well, think of all the immigrants. And Irish nationalists, Ireland is fighting Britain for independence at this time. And then socialists, like the IWW or Eugene Debs and other socialists, are arguing that this war is just a capitalistic war where the bankers and the manufacturers get rich and the working class fill up the coffins. And there is a point to that. This is showing the trade increasing very much with Britain and France. A lot of that bought on credit and through American banks, and trade with Germany just skyrocketing down. And you can have a look at this chart, which shows that 35% of Americans have a parent, at least one parent, who was born in one of these nations that's at war, or they themselves were born there. So quite a lot. All right, so how did America get in? These two very much related things. Later in the war, Germany's become desperate. It's clear that this is not going to be a war that's going to be won with the military. You're not going to get a military victory, so you start to look for victories in other ways. And it was quite clear that it's going to be that nation that's morale and confidence and supplies, particularly food, can last. That's going to be the country that wins. And Germany's at a desperate situation where they realize, they can't keep this up forever. And at some point there's going to be a revolt and a backlash from the people, particularly the women, which had already happened in Russia. And so the Germans thinking, well, maybe they can do that to Britain first, starve Britain out by attacking American shipping to Britain and hoping that Britain will run out of key supplies and that their morale will drop and that there'll be a public outcry to end the war. And the Germans feel, well, the Americans are going to need time, 9 months to a year to organize and to transport their soldiers over. And by that time, maybe Britain can be out. So it's a cold calculation of will this work by blockading Britain, by attacking American shipping, knowing America will come into the war, and hoping that they'll have enough time before America can literally get in the war. The Zimmerman note, if you recall from modern world history, was a message that was sent to the Mexican government from the German government. The German foreign minister, Zimmerman, who said, look, we're going to be attacking American ships. It's probably going to bring them into the war. Why don't you take this opportunity, join us, and attack America, maybe seize back some of the territory you've lost from them in the past, like Texas and California or New Mexico. The Mexican government was in no position to do so. And also, the cultural and economic ties are not to be downplayed, particularly the economic ties. America needs Britain to win because America trades with Britain and Britain owes America a lot of money. How do you convince the country to go to war? Okay, so, they're resumed unrestricted warfare. The Zimmerman note's out, and Wilson wants to declare war, and he goes towards Congress and says, we need to have this war to make the world safe for democracy. We're going to go over there. We're not going to fight for territory or glory, but to bring this war to an end and to be able to impose a good peace upon the people of Europe. And we need to be able to be one of the ones to sit down at the table to discuss the peace. And if we don't get involved in the war, we won't be able to sit down at that table. And Congress listens and declares war. There was a strong spirit for it. And they start mobilizing, which does take time. You got to take these plowboys, farmers, young men, and recruit them, train them, equip them, and get them over there. And it did take about 9 months to a year. They did it through a draft, and 24 million Americans registered. About 3 million were drafted, and about 2 million went over to France, and a fraction of those did see fighting. Now, their contribution, did it help win the war? Absolutely. Not militarily, though. It was not a military victory. It was morale. They're coming over. They're fresh. They're healthy, and the people of Europe are just weary and sick of the war, and it just gives France and Britain just such a moral boost of confidence that we can do this. And on the other side, Germany and these other Central Powers, a real weakening of their confidence. And soon after the Americans coming in, Austria-Hungary will break apart into its constituent parts of the Polish and the Czechs and the Slovaks and so on. And Germany wouldn't last that much longer as well. Now, Woodrow Wilson, make the world safe for democracy. He calls out his vision for the peace afterwards, and he's saying we're going to have peace without victory. He laid out 14 points. We don't need to go through all of them in details, but he's saying for the people of the Austrian-Hungary Empire that those countries should be recognized as independent, and there should be no more imperialism, no more sort of empires. Now, that's not going to apply outside of Europe. As much as he might have wanted it. He wants all nations of the world to disarm and reduce their disarmaments, free trade, open diplomacy, none of these secret alliances or discussions that had been responsible for getting them into the war. And finally, the last one, the most controversial, he called for an international organization. It will be called the League of Nations, a forerunner to the United Nations. And he said it'll be one big alliance of collective security. If you attack one, then you attack all. And this is a very much taking America into a new direction in terms of his vision of what he would like to see. So he's definitely an idealist and interventionist and internationalist with his 14 points. But with foreign policy, you got to think, what do the other guys want? What did France want out of the war? Well, they'd suffered the most, and they want to punish Germany and get a lot of stuff back from them. And George Clemenceau here, he's the Tiger, as he was known, and he's going to be the foremost of driving the discussions, and he's going to get more of what he wanted: security and revenge and money. Now, David Lloyd George, what does he want? Well, publicly saying the same things that Clemenceau in France is saying, but privately he's kind of concerned if there's a weak Germany, because he's seeing Germany as the bulwark, the shield against communist Russia. Concerned that if they punish and weaken Germany, that it might lead to a communist revolution there, and they would like to see, get money from Germany, but they're seeing that should be coming through trade, and they want to rebuild up there. And for Wilson there on the right, he had a very public feud with Henry Cabot Lodge, who was a leading senator on foreign affairs, and they're different political parties. Lodge is Republican, Wilson is Democratic, and Lodge has the control of the Congress and of the Senate. And he's publicly gone against this whole League of Nations, and the others knew that, Clemenceau and David Lloyd George. And Wilson was the only one at the conference of the big three who didn't have control of his legislature, and it put him in a very weak bargaining position. Wilson should have included Lodge in the delegation that went over to Europe. Personally, they just disliked each other. So the blunders in Paris, the weak U.S. bargaining position with the Republican-controlled Congress did not invite the delegations over, and Senator Lodge's public position on the League of Nations, and then the treaty that they end up signing, which didn't include Wilson's loftier visions of peace without victory. No, this is going to be one of punishing Germany, humiliating Germany, getting the money from Germany, forcing them to admit guilt for it, and it's not going to bring an end to imperialism. It's in fact an expansion of it. Japan will take Germans' possessions in China. It did not make the Chinese pleased. That actually led to the May 4th movement there, and the beginnings of communism in China. And the Ottoman Empire, much of it went to Britain and France. And the League of Nations, with or without the United States, was a bit of a toothless tiger, and will be created but will not be functioning the way that it was meant to function. And then the treaty just dies in the Senate, the Treaty of Versailles. There's three possible outcomes and three voting blocks, and don't get too confused by all this. The main idea is that the Senate doesn't ratify it. They could have ratified it as it was. They could have ratified it with Lodge's 14 reservations, he said. He said, I don't like it, but if we make these changes to it. Or they could just not ratify the treaty either way, which ends up what's happening because the 4/5 of senators say they support, options A or B, but you couldn't get a 2/3 majority on either of them. Democrats would not vote for the reservations. Lodge's Republicans wouldn't support the treaty as it is, and then the other group, the irreconcilables, would not support either side for it. The second option, ratifying the Treaty of Versailles with Lodge's 14 reservations in it, would have happened if Wilson had supported some compromises, but his unwillingness to compromise in the Treaty of Versailles. And the compromises that Lodge is looking for are things within the League of Nations. If the United States joined the League of Nations, that their sovereignty would be guaranteed and that they wouldn't be forced into any kind of military action or alliances. And from Wilson's point of view, that sort of would destroy the way that the League of Nations was supposed to work. And so we get a gap in the bridge to the League of Nations with the United States not joining it, and it's not going to be that thing that Wilson had envisioned. It would be, as an instrument of collective security to stop a future war. And when crises do break out in the 1930s with Japan and Germany and Italy, the League will be unable to act upon it. All right, so that's the United States' entry into the war and their contributions to the war and their failure to ratify the Treaty of Versailles. All right, thank you very much for listening.